We just got fed up with that and just said, okay, don't sing it. Why don't you just quit? You say you're unhappy, quit.
Success reshapes every band it touches. It lifts them, strains them, and, if the pressure grows sharp enough, splinters them. Few groups lived that rise and collapse more dramatically than the Eagles, who soared from dusty Los Angeles bars to selling more than 100 million records. They captured the American mood, then were undone by it. Stardom fueled them, ego fractured them, and somewhere between harmony and hostility, they lost control of the empire they built.
I said, Irving, if you'd been in a band for 11 years and you were still making $250 a week working 40 weeks a year, maybe you'd be a little smashed and gacked up yourself.
So how did a band that conquered the world fall all the way to zero? Broken, silent, and convinced they would never reunite. The desert-born beginning. They were not legends yet, just hungry musicians chasing a sound that did not exist until they invented it. In the early 70s, Glenn Frey and Don Henley crossed paths in Linda Ronstadt's orbit, studying harmony, arrangement, and chemistry, night after night. Backstage, ambition flickered. They imagined a band that fused country warmth with rock urgency, a California dream with steel string bones. When Bernie Leadon and Randy Meisner stepped into the circle, the spark became a blueprint. 4 voices, one vision, a future none of them could yet see. Los Angeles at the time was a creative crossroads, where the promise of sunshine hid the grind behind every great song. Laurel Canyon had become a sanctuary for musicians searching for identity, and Frey and Henley walked into it like apprentices eager to learn. Porch gatherings turned into accidental masterclasses. Musical ideas drifted through open windows, and friendships formed not from industry strategy, but from shared hunger. Within that landscape, the early Eagles found a kind of artistic oxygen, plenty of influence, but no pressure yet to crystallize it. Frey once said, "Those first rehearsals were like discovering a language we already knew, but had never spoken out loud." That language quickly became structure. Their sessions were slow, careful, and rooted in the belief that harmonies mattered as much as any guitar line. Leadon brought the authenticity of country music. Meisner contributed emotional lift with his unmistakable high register. Henley grounded the arrangements rhythmically, while Frey directed the band toward cohesion. Their chemistry made even early, unpolished songs feel strangely complete. Songwriting soon turned into a ritual. They passed notebooks back and forth, debating phrases and challenging each other to refine every detail. Nothing slipped through untouched. Where many bands found their footing through spontaneity, the Eagles built theirs through deliberation. They sensed that their blend of voices could do something unusual, carry narratives with the clarity of folk, the muscle of rock, and the emotional weight of country storytelling. Henley later reflected, "We knew we wanted stories that felt lived in, songs with dust on their boots but purpose in their stride." That intention shaped their early recordings. When producer Glyn Johns heard them sing together for the first time, he immediately recognized their advantage. The vocals were not an embellishment. They were the core. Instruments existed to frame the harmonies, not overwhelm them. It was an approach that gave the band a quiet confidence. They did not have to be louder than everyone else. They just had to be aligned.
There is moonlight.
Live performances became their testing ground. In small clubs under dim lights, they worked through arrangements with the same seriousness they brought to rehearsal rooms. Crowds responded less to spectacle and more to the precision of their blend. The harmonies landed like a signature, instantly recognizable, quietly commanding. Those nights convinced the band that they were no longer just experimenting. They were defining something. Frey summarized those early years best when he said, "We were building a house we planned to live in for a long time. Every board had to be straight." In that raw beginning, before fame, before pressure, before fractures, they found clarity. They were a band built on intention, discipline, and a sound only they could craft. And that foundation would propel them into heights none of them were prepared for, but all of them would eventually confront. A meteoric American rise. Fame arrived like a desert storm, fast, loud, and impossible to outrun. Take It Easy, Witchy Woman, and Desperado pulled the Eagles from regional promise to national force. Their harmonies felt effortless, their songwriting disarmingly sharp. Crowds swelled, pressure followed, and with every hit, the engine accelerated. But inside the band, the very chemistry that made them unstoppable was beginning to strain. Perfection met ego, vision met exhaustion, and success, once a blessing, began to feel like a weight none of them could comfortably carry. Suddenly, they were everywhere, on radio rotations that never seemed to end, on stages that grew larger each month, and in magazines eager to brand them as the new architects of the California sound. What had started as a quiet artistic experiment now carried the force of a cultural tide. Their early tours were packed with audiences who knew the lyrics before the band even struck the first chord. For a group still calibrating their identity, the speed of the ascent was disorienting. They were learning in real time how to carry a national spotlight without losing the precision that earned it. Henley once said, "We went from station wagons to private planes so fast that our heads never quite caught up." That disconnect between where they came from and where fame placed them shaped the next phase of their rise. Life on the road became both a reward and a burden. Long stretches of travel blurred into one another, with the band performing night after night under increasing expectations. Their harmonies, once formed in sunlit rehearsal rooms, now had to endure restless crowds, strained voices, and the constant noise of a growing industry around them. Despite the whirlwind, the songs kept flowing. Each new release climbed faster than the last, proving their sound was more than a trend, it was a reflection of the cultural moment. America was searching for music that felt honest, measured, and emotionally grounded, and the Eagles delivered that blend with rare consistency. But consistency required discipline, and discipline demanded energy they were quickly draining. The gap between their polished public image and the fraying reality behind the scenes widened with every chart-topping single. Frey later reflected, "We were living the dream, but sometimes it felt like the dream was running us instead of the other way around." He was not exaggerating. Behind closed doors, creative disagreements sharpened. Some members pushed for more experimentation. Others insisted on protecting the formula that brought them success. Minor tensions became recurring patterns, especially during recordings where every note and lyric carried the weight of expectations they had placed on themselves. The band that once operated with a shared instinct was now negotiating each step. As their audience broadened, so did the scrutiny. Industry executives hovered, critics dissected every artistic choice, and fans demanded constant evolution. The Eagles responded by tightening their sound, sharpening their writing, and approaching each album as a statement rather than a collection of songs. But that ambition required sacrifice, sleep, calm, and sometimes harmony among the members. Henley summarized the era with a quiet honesty. "We were chasing excellence, but the chase came with a cost none of us fully understood at the time. They were becoming giants of American music, yet each step upward added pressure that threatened the unity they built in those early Canyon days. The rise was meteoric, thrilling, historic, and transformative, but it came with cracks forming beneath the surface, cracks that would soon widen in ways none of them could ignore. The Hotel California Zenith. This was the mountaintop, the kind most bands never reach and even fewer survive. With Don Felder's intricate guitar lines and Joe Walsh's fearless electricity, the Eagles stepped into a darker, sharper world. Hotel California was more than an album. It was a cultural mirror reflecting ambition, excess, and the cost of the dream. Its perfection came from friction, sessions marked by brilliance one minute and tension the next. On the surface, the band was unstoppable. Underneath, the foundation was beginning to tremble. The early sessions for the album were unlike anything the band had attempted before. Instead of leaning into the familiar warmth of their earlier sound, they began shaping music with a colder edge, haunted, spacious, and loaded with metaphor. Felder brought a cinematic sensibility to the guitar arrangements, crafting progressions that felt like movie landscapes stretching toward a horizon that never truly arrived. Walsh added voltage, unpredictability, and a sense that anything could erupt at any moment. It was the perfect storm of technique and attitude. Henley once said, "We wanted to tell the truth about the world we were living in, even if that truth felt uncomfortable." That honesty shaped every note on the record. The lyrics dissected fame, isolation, and illusion with poetic sharpness. The melodies floated between beauty and unease, and the band, though strained, understood that they were capturing something rare, an album that did not just define a sound, but documented an era. What they were building felt larger than themselves, and that weight influenced how intensely they approached every take. The recording process, however, was far from serene. The band's growing perfectionism meant long nights and endless revisions. Henley and Frey pushed the group relentlessly, believing the album's potential warranted every ounce of pressure. Walsh and Felder, meanwhile, poured themselves into the guitar work, often spending hours shaping solos that would later be hailed as some of rock's most iconic. The dual lead climax of the title track became a symbol of their creative synergy, a moment of pure magic forged in a room full of tension. Frey later reflected, "We knew we had something special, but making it nearly tore us apart. There were disagreements about arrangements, fights over pacing, and debates about whether certain songs even belonged on the album. Yet the conflict never fully dissolved the unity at the heart of their sound. Instead, it sharpened it. They were pushing one another to the brink because the music demanded that level of commitment. They were building a monument, even if the scaffolding felt shaky. Every session seemed to walk a line between breakthrough and breakdown, a fragile equilibrium that only fueled the album's intensity. When the album finally released, the impact was immediate and seismic. It was not just commercially successful, it became a cultural checkpoint, a portrait of the American dream turned inside out. Audiences were mesmerized by the record's eerie confidence, its sense of wandering through a beautiful but unsettling landscape. Critics praised its ambition. Musicians studied its construction, and fans felt its honesty in ways that transcended genre lines. The album did not just resonate, it lingered, echoing through car radios, concert halls, and quiet rooms long after the final notes faded. Henley summarized the album's legacy with precision. "Hotel California was our way of saying that even paradise has a price." Yet even as the applause grew louder, the internal pressure intensified. The very masterpiece that elevated the Eagles also magnified the fractures within them. They had reached the mountaintop and discovered that the air at the top was thin, cold, and unforgiving. Pressure, perfection, and fracture. Success magnifies everything: talent, ego, fear, and need. As the tours intensified and expectations multiplied, so did the cracks. Henley and Frey demanded precision, others pushed for freedom. Sessions stretched into emotional marathons, every lyric and arrangement becoming a battlefield. The group that once fused instinctively now felt divided by invisible borders. The songs still soared, but the trust that shaped them was evaporating, replaced by frustration, fatigue, and the slow erosion of patience. The more the band achieved, the more they expected of themselves. Their rise had been steep, and maintaining that altitude required discipline that bordered on punishing. Night after night on tour, they delivered harmonies with surgical exactness. But behind the curtain, conversations grew sharper. Creative differences that once felt productive now landed like accusations. Some members believed the band needed to evolve faster. Others believed they were bending too far from the sound that made them iconic. The once shared vision had splintered into competing philosophies, leaving each member feeling both essential and isolated. Henley later admitted, "We were all perfectionists, and sometimes perfectionism can become a prison." That prison began to shape their days in the studio. What used to be collaborative became territorial. Frey obsessed over structure. Henley chased lyrical precision. Walsh pushed for experimentation. Felder fought to protect musical complexity. Even small choices, tempos, solos, harmonies, became points of tension. The work was still extraordinary, but it came at an increasingly steep emotional cost, wearing down the joy that once made creation effortless. As the band's internal pressures intensified, so did the demands from outside. Record executives wanted more hits. Fans expected evolution. Journalists speculated about dynamics within the group. Every new song carried the weight of their reputation. Every performance felt like a test. In quieter moments, some members admitted feeling trapped by the success they once prayed for. The dream had grown teeth, and no one knew how to slow it down. Its momentum swallowed rest, reflection, and sometimes even compassion. Felder once reflected, "When a band gets that big, everyone has an idea of what it should be, and those ideas rarely match." The clash of visions created a silent fatigue. Members drifted into separate corners during breaks, avoiding confrontation but unable to escape its presence. Even laughter became rare. The same meticulous drive that elevated their music eroded their ability to hear one another clearly. They were functioning, but no longer flowing. They were performing, but no longer understanding. The machine was still moving, but the human parts were wearing down faster than anyone admitted.
There's all this undercurrent and resentment and, plotting and complaining.
Live shows reflected this growing imbalance. The performances were immaculate. Few audiences sensed the fractures behind the harmonies, but the atmosphere on stage felt brittle, small. Disagreements turned into whispered arguments. Set lists became battles. The applause, once energizing, now felt hollow to some members, as if they were celebrating a version of the band that no longer existed. Each encore felt like a polished mask placed over a widening divide. Frey captured the moment with stark honesty. When you stop trusting each other, the songs don't feel the same, even if they sound perfect. By this period, the Eagles were both unstoppable and unsustainable. Their music reached extraordinary heights, yet their bond was fraying thread by thread. The precision that defined their brilliance became the force that pushed them further apart. They were still standing together, but rarely in the same direction. And with every session, every tour, every expectation, the fractures deepened, preparing the stage for the breaking point that was inevitably approaching. The breaking point collapse. The famous phrase, "when hell freezes over," was not born from humor. It came from exhaustion. By the late 70s, the Eagles were a band supported by contracts rather than camaraderie. On-stage arguments spilled into the open. Backstage resentment hardened into silence. Their final shows were played by musicians who no longer looked at each other. In 1980, the final eruption arrived. Public, raw, irreversible. The dream shattered. The dynasty fell, and the Eagles were finished. The collapse was not sudden. It had been building quietly for years, a slow accumulation of unspoken frustrations, competing visions, and emotional bruises never allowed to heal. The more pressure mounted, the more the band retreated into separate corners, interacting only when the music forced them to share space. The friendships that once held them together now felt distant, almost unrecognizable. Studio sessions that previously thrived on collaboration became tense exchanges where even small disagreements ignited disproportionate reactions. The band was still functioning, but only in the way a damaged machine functions moments before failing. Henley later said, "We simply could not live up to the myth people created around us. The weight of it finally crushed the structure, and that weight was immense. Constant touring drained their stamina. Endless expectations drained their patience. Every new show felt like a negotiation, every rehearsal like an interrogation. Fans saw polished performances, but behind the curtain the atmosphere was brittle. Arguments erupted over arrangements, over cues, over who carried more responsibility. Even the music, once their shared sanctuary, had become another battlefield." The breaking point arrived during a political benefit concert in Long Beach, an event meant to be charitable, not catastrophic. But tensions backstage were so volatile that one disagreement triggered a chain reaction. Frey and Felder exchanged words that carried the weight of years of unresolved conflict. The hostility was so palpable that the band played the entire show knowing it would be their last performance together. They executed every note with precision while simultaneously preparing for the confrontation waiting behind the curtain. Frey later recalled, "We were on stage smiling, but underneath we were saying things to each other no band should ever say." Once the show ended, the conflict escalated into the kind of final argument that leaves no doors open. The long-time partnership between Frey and Felder, once creatively electric, had become combustible. The others, equally exhausted, had nothing left to mediate with. It was the culmination of a long descent. Too many expectations, too many unspoken resentments, too much pressure without release. Within days, the Eagles ceased to exist. There was no formal announcement at first, just silence, then distance, then the unmistakable truth that the band everyone knew was gone. Contracts still tied them together legally, but emotionally, the ties had snapped. Members drifted into solo projects, seeking not only independence but recovery. The idea of a reunion seemed impossible, even laughable, which is precisely why the phrase "hell freezing over" became their unofficial epitaph. Henley summed up the collapse simply, "We had reached the point where continuing would have done more harm than good." The breaking point collapse marked the end of one of America's most successful bands, but it also marked the end of the illusion that their harmony was effortless. It was never effortless. It was crafted, fought for, and ultimately undone by the very forces that propelled them to greatness. The long descent to zero. For 14 years, the Eagles did not exist. No tours, no rehearsals, no cautious reunions. Their legacy lived on radio and vinyl, while the men who created it scattered into separate lives. Solo careers rose and fell. Lawsuits replaced harmonies. Old wounds replaced nostalgia. The band that once ruled American music had reduced itself to memory, a monument standing over the ruins of partnership. And yet, in that long silence, something unexpected began to take shape. Reflection. And from reflection, the faintest outline of possibility. The breakup left each member confronting the aftermath in his own way. Some tried to outrun the past, diving into solo albums or collaborations that offered temporary purpose. Others withdrew, carrying the weight of unresolved resentment. The separation felt definitive. Fans speculated endlessly, but the former bandmates rarely spoke, and when they did, their words were often sharp. The idea of the Eagles ever sharing a stage again felt almost absurd. They had not just drifted apart, they had detonated. Henley once remarked, "We needed distance, because every conversation back then felt like reopening an old wound." Distance became their only form of peace. Without the constant grind of touring, some rediscovered stillness. Others wrestled with the strange reality of life outside the machine that had defined them. Time, however, has a way of softening edges, even those carved by conflict. As the 80s unfolded into the 90s, the bitterness that once seemed permanent began loosening its grip. Still, the divide remained enormous. Legal battles continued to flare, especially surrounding songwriting, royalties, and the creative control they once shared uneasily. Courtrooms replaced dressing rooms, attorneys replaced producers. Their interactions were transactional at best, hostile at worst. Yet beneath all the tension, their music refused to fade. Radio stations continued playing the hits. New generations discovered Hotel California as if it were freshly released. The band's legacy, stubborn and alive, kept echoing even when its creators wished to move on. Frey later reflected, "It's strange when your past feels more present than your future. The music kept following us everywhere." That persistent shadow forced the band members to confront a truth they had spent years avoiding. The Eagles were bigger than any individual frustration. Fans were not letting the memory die, and whether they admitted it or not, a small part of each member felt pulled toward the unfinished story they had left behind. By the early 90s, something shifted. The public still adored the band, but more importantly, the members themselves began revisiting old memories with less hostility and more perspective. Conversations that once felt impossible started happening quietly, privately, without microphones or managers. The anger that once fueled separation no longer held the same heat. Even the famous phrase, "when hell freezes over," long used as their ironclad refusal, started feeling less like a declaration and more like a smokescreen hiding unfinished emotional business. Henley captured this turning point in a later reflection. Time didn't heal everything, but it reminded us of what still mattered. The 14-year descent to zero was not simply the absence of the Eagles. It was a long, necessary unraveling, an era of reckoning, regret, recalibration, and reluctant maturity. The silence, though painful, cleared the air, and in that empty space, the music they once built together lingered like a quiet invitation. The story was not over. It was only waiting for the right moment to begin again. In the end, the story of the Eagles is not just the rise and fall of a band. It is the story of how brilliance and pressure can collide, how harmony can fracture, and how even legends must confront their own humanity. Their journey reminds us that success is rarely clean, and that every triumph carries a hidden cost. Yet within the conflict, the exhaustion and the silence, something lasting remained: the music. It survived the fractures that the people could not. It carried their voices into new decades, new audiences, and new moments of rediscovery, proving that creation can outlive the chaos that forged it. And maybe that is the truest legacy any artist can hope for, long after the lights fade and the noise settles. If you have your own memories of the Eagles, share them below. And if you want more cinematic deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe.